Well, good morning. It is Tuesday, May 19th, and welcome to Coffee with Ken. I'm Ken Biberaj, Managing Director at Savills, a leading tenant advisory commercial real estate firm, and we are in the middle of week 10 of social distancing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Yesterday, the president announced that he was taking hydroxychloroquine to prevent COVID-19, despite a lack of evidence that it works. Today's topic is protecting the environment in a post-COVID-19 world, and we're very fortunate to be joined by the former governor of New Jersey and former administrator of the EPA, Governor Todd Whitman. Good to see you, Governor.
Good to see you, Ken. It's good to be with you.
Well, thanks for making the time. So I am here virtually at Koopy Coffee in Edgewater, New Jersey, where my wife is from, and where I always try to go when we visit our in-laws. So I figured I'd get a New Jersey coffee shop here for us today. How are things looking in New Jersey?
Well, we're starting to open up gradually. The governor's taking the right approach, I think. Unfortunately, people are going stir crazy. You want to get out. You're desperate. And there are people who have lost their jobs. They're worried about their homes. They're worried about their businesses. Can they come back? And the tension is mounting. But the more you learn about this disease, the pandemic, the more you realize you've got to take it seriously. And it's not that the governor wants to hold things back. Lord knows the hit on the budget has been huge. It's that he wants to do it safely, because there could be nothing worse than opening too fast and having another wave of this come at us and have to close down again. That would be really sad.
Especially as summer's coming, and I think people's natural inclination is to head to the beach or be out and about.
Yes. I mean, it's so beautiful out. Even today, the wind is blowing. It's cooler here in New Jersey, but it's a beautiful day. It's a great day to get out and walk, and you can do those kinds of things.
Sure.
And that you can do safely and intelligently. It's this crowding that's such a problem, and people don't seem to understand how quickly this thing can spread and how easily it can spread.
So I feel like you have such a unique perspective, right, as a former governor, a high-ranking, federal official. So let's kind of tease it out a little bit, right? So you mentioned the state budget. I think this is one of those things that's not really getting as much attention as it should, is just how state budgets operate, right? Whether they're driven by income tax or by sales tax, and just how challenging it's going to be with these big shortfalls that are happening across the country. So, as someone who led New Jersey, how do you think about state budgets? How would you encourage people to kind of think or appreciate the magnitude of what might be coming down in the, next, because it is kind of a lagging indicator, right? I mean, as the state's budgets
especially when you consider in New Jersey, as in many other states, you have a constitutional requirement to balance the budget. I mean, you've got to balance it. That's the law. And the New Jersey governor has an advantage because you can certify what the revenues are, but you can't play with that number. I mean, you really can't fake it and make it. And this is going to be a big hit. It's going to take a long time to come back because, New Jersey, as in most of this country, the economy is driven by small businesses, business. And those are the ones that are being hit the hardest. What we've got to hope for is that there's encouraging news in the Congress, because finally the House and the Senate, through this problem solvers caucus, has come together uniquely. It's the first time in ages that people can remember. Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, have come together and put forward a bipartisan bill as to how to provide some relief to the states and local entities and the small businesses. And that's what we really need. Because, unfortunately, we don't have now anyone who's overseeing how this money has been spent over the first 2-3 of these bailouts. And, when that happens, nothing's perfect from the start. There are always going to be problems, and there are people who game the system. That's why it's so important to have somebody overseeing it who doesn't have a vested interest one way or another, except to see that the money is spent the right way and that nobody's gaming the system. And we don't have that. So it's going to be interesting to see how this bipartisan bill works, because it's the first time that it's come from the bottom up. The leaders have been so powerful in the House and the Senate for so long that everything has been from the top down, and they determine what bills can be heard, whether they can be voted. Doesn't matter how many people support it. If they decide they don't want to hear it, as you've seen with Mitch McConnell has done a number of times in the Senate, they don't get a vote on it. And now this is something that's coming from the bottom up, a lot harder for leadership to ignore.
And how do you game that out? I mean, do you think they're going to get some real traction? I mean, how do you think that plays out over the next, 30, 60, 90 days?
I think it does. I think it gets a lot of traction because there are a lot of frustrated members. They're frustrated by the system that's been hemming them in Congress. It's always been determined by what they call the four pillars. It's the two leaders in the House and the Senate, the majority leader and minority leader in the Senate, the Speaker of the House, the minority leader in the House. And they determine what bills go before the House, what bills are posted. It's no longer the committee chairs. And the committees are made up of much more balanced groups. And so this time it's something that has come forward from membership, and I think they're going to get a lot of support on this, and it'll have to be debated. Is it a perfect bill? I don't know. I haven't seen it. I don't know, and no bill is perfect. But is it a better bill than what we've been given? Let's hope so. And certainly it is a place to start with a real debate on this, understanding that the issue is we've got to get this to the small businesses. Whether the right way to do it is through the payroll protection program, where you're really investing businesses to keep their employees, but not the huge ones. The huge businesses, the publicly traded businesses, for the most part, have some cushion. They have some cushion. And we got to make sure that if those that do get this money actually keep their employees and use this money the way it's supposed to be used, when there's some indication that hasn't been happening the way it should. And so but really we need to get it to the small and mid-sized businesses, because keep them related to their employees and keep employees, give them some kind of security.
Yeah, and it seems like since the outset of this, it's been a bit of a decentralized response, right? All the states have kind of been on their own, right? So I wanted to get your take on how you've seen that reaction, right? I mean, obviously I think as a governor, you probably want to have as much control as possible, but then this is a national, international issue, right? So from a leadership and response standpoint, how do you think that played out? Was it good? Was it bad? Should it all be on the governors? Should there have been more of a federal kind of engagement and direction from the outset?
I believe it should have been. It's been very frustrating for the governors. It should have been. What we need from the federal government, what you need any time in a crisis, is you need consistent messaging from the top, what you know, what you don't know, transparent, but consistent. And we haven't had that from Washington. It's been all over the place. It's been, you should socially distance, but don't socially distance, go ahead and protest. The president's in control of everything because he's president and he can make the states do anything, but then he has no responsibility. He's not in charge of anything. That just throws it into mass confusion, which is why you see such disparate reopenings happening around the country. And the problem with this thing is, if you don't start to solve this problem for everyone, you don't get it for anyone, because it spreads so easily. And one state, people move between states and they go from one state to the other. And if they've come from a state where nobody's paying attention to these social distancing, then they're going to expose other people. And the federal government also has a role in that no state ever would have enough personal protective equipment and ventilators. That's where the federal government has a responsibility. They have a responsibility to step up, and they have to use the powers that the federal government has to get these things out, the testing kits and all of that. And without that, the states have had to do it on their own, and they found themselves in competition with one another, vying to buy things, and the prices keep getting jacked up because it's a buyer's market. And they're even competing in some cases against the federal government in buying some of this equipment and ventilators. And that's not helpful. That's not moving us forward. I think we've missed a lot of opportunity to slow this down even faster. We're starting to do it, but
I mean, just the news even out of Maryland with Larry Hogan, right? I mean, I think he had to cut his own deal with South Korea, and I'm pretty sure a lot of the supplies and material they have in hiding, or they're kind of keeping at the separate warehouses confidentially. I mean, it just doesn't strike me as how
also, the thing that's so frustrating is apparently the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, has a very detailed plan of how to reopen safely. I mean, for restaurants, for instance, the table 6 feet apart, you should have a plastic spray or sneeze protector. You instead use chalkboard instead of handing menus out. I mean, a whole list of things. So, and they're not. The administration hasn't let them put that out. They should put that out so that everybody knows the basics. And then if a state wants to be more protective, fine, let them be more protective. But there should be some basics and some basic understanding that this is what's safe.
Mhm.
And this is how you can do it safely. And then everybody's singing off the same song sheet. And that's what we need.
So take us back to the aftermath of September 11th attacks, right? You were in the federal government. How was that reaction, that response? Any lessons learned from then to today, and kind of what you saw as someone who had gone from state leadership to federal leadership?
Sure. No, that was enormously trying, but I will say that the federal government is much more coordinated in its response. The EPA we put a website up, I think it was within 10 days, because there were a lot of different organizations, or hospital, NYU, the city, the state, and EPA all doing, taking air readings, but all were looking for slightly different things and measuring in slightly different ways. And so that was very hard for the public to compare apples to apples, to know what was really going on from one day to the next. We were able to synchronize that and put it up on a website within about 10 days so that people could look and see absolutely what was going on, what the level of pollution was from day to day. I mean, I got heavily criticized because the readings that we were getting, and when I talked to the scientists every morning, which is what I did, and talking about ambient air quality in Lower Manhattan in general, they were saying they were seeing nothing that told them there were going to be long-term health consequences in general. However, on the pile, they should wear respirators. And that's how I always answered the question. First was, yes, it's safe in Lower Manhattan, but on the pile, but that part seemed to get lost. And EPA wasn't in a position to require, only the city could have done that, require those responders to wear respirators. And I'm convinced that those who are getting sick are because of that. And that's where you have a problem in coordinating response, because when you have an emergency like that, the city is the primary responder, unless they stand back and say, no, federal government, you take this over, which didn't happen in New York. And you can see the difference. I mean, at the Pentagon, nobody got sick because the Army controlled that, the military controlled that whole site, and they didn't let anybody near it wearing full hazmat gear, protective gear. So you need to have that coordination between the federal government and the states or the local governments. This pandemic is different. Obviously, you don't have a single site. It's around the world, as you point out. And so that's why it becomes even more important to have a consistent message from Washington that lays out what is safe, the parameters of what's safe and what isn't. And then I worry, you mentioned the president is taking the drug of which he's been so fond, the problem is that people take what he says as gospel. And for people who have some underlying conditions like heart conditions, this can be fatal. This is not a drug to take just because you feel like taking it. It has not been proven to be something that will help you not get COVID-19 or that will help you come out of it. There are no studies that show that. If the president wants to do it, okay, but that message to the public is what's scary, because it can cause so many bad side effects.
So when you talk about coordination, I mean, I guess the difference today, as you've alluded, is this is a pandemic and it's global. So how do you assess kind of what we're doing today and what we should be doing vis-a-vis kind of global coordination and partnering and best practices? I mean, there's obviously been real challenging situations in Sweden and Italy, but some progress in New Zealand and South Korea, right? So it seems like because it's so scattered, some places are doing a little better, but an opportunity to kind of coordinate and get best practices, I would imagine, right?
Absolutely. And we should be involved with the World Health Organization. Is it perfect? No. Does it need reforming? Yes. But this is the platform that you can use to get all the countries together to start to learn what are those best practices? What is happening in Italy as they open? I mean, you see in China, they're having to go back now in Wuhan, and some people are being quarantined again because they're starting to see an uptick. I mean, we don't have enough of the contact testing in this country yet. And we're seeing that that's what makes a difference in South Korea and some of these other countries that are coming back. So we should be learning from that. We should be working together with the other countries, because, I mean, for instance, look at the vaccines. There's one now here that looks pretty good, but France has one that may be quicker to the market, but not at the numbers that we need. So the numbers are so vast. If you're going to inoculate everyone, which it looks as if you're going to have to, you're going to need more than one. And we need to be taking advantage of what others learn. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. Everything isn't proprietary. It can't be in a situation like this. And it's really scary when you see young kids starting to get sick.
So just to make a bit of a pivot, right? We had Michelle Flournoy, who was an undersecretary of defense in the Obama administration on a couple weeks ago. And the topic was really public health as a national security crisis, right? And I think that comes kind of, right after, on the heels of this kind of growing dialogue that the environment and climate change is a national security concern. How do you think about climate change now, and about kind of piggybacking that on the pandemic, or how they interconnect, if at all, right? Like, how does the rest of the environment play into a pandemic? I mean, what's that nexus, you think?
I think they're absolutely connected. There is no question but that as the climate changes, ecosystems change. Mm-hmm. And as ecosystems change, pathogens develop that weren't there before. They're able to spread faster in different ways. So we need to be concerned about this as a climate issue as well as a health issue. Because if we don't start doing something about climate change, we're going to find ourselves facing more and more of these. And you're starting to see some, I won't call them pandemics, but things are spreading. For instance, there's a new disease that they're now finding in rabbits. And people will say, oh, well, who cares about rabbits? Well, we do care, because when you start messing with the ecosystem, they don't say this is COVID-19, but they say it's it kind of presents like that. It could be related. And you have to figure out, did humans get this from bats? Did humans get it from a lab? We don't know that. And it doesn't seem from all the studies that I've seen that there really has been much justification for saying that it came out of a lab in Wuhan. Certainly China tried to hide what was happening and hasn't been open and should be sanctioned for that. I mean, there should be problems. There should be a punishment for that eventually. Yeah. But right now we need to deal with it, and we need to understand that the climate is very much a part of this. And it's not just that we're going to see more hurricanes. For instance, we have a tropical storm already, a named tropical storm, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the hurricane season starts. And people might say, oh, that's not much. But for the first time, most of the models, and this is the first time it's happened in ages, there were 3 models. There's a 4th one I haven't seen where that's come out yet, but those 3 were almost identical. And this is a very unusual thing to happen about how many hurricanes. And this is going to be a very active season, up to 11. And that has economic consequences. That has huge consequences for us. So we need to take climate seriously. We can rebuild in the economy. The green jobs that are coming are growing fast and can be very profitable. Mm-hmm. We can be competitive in the world. The rest of the world is moving on this, and nobody is more innovative, frankly, than the United States. So we need to take advantage of it, and we can be players in this, but not if we keep ignoring it.
So I'll probably, like everybody, I'm spending too much time on my phone and on Twitter and social media. And I think I saw a meme the other day which said something like, global warming or climate change needs to hire COVID's PR agent, right? Because it gets everyone's attention. But it does strike me that it's not getting enough attention, this kind of interconnectivity between climate change and these shifts in our global ecosystem to pandemics and disease and so on. I mean, so how does this get amplified, do you think? I mean, I feel like even world leaders aren't necessarily talking as much about this kind of connection here.
No, everybody's focused on the economy, which I understand. And for so long, we have been led to believe that this is a zero-sum game, that you can't have a thriving economy and a healthy green environment. And that's just wrong. In fact, you can't have one without the other. If people aren't healthy, if they don't have a good quality of life, they're not going to be contributing economically in the way they do. Plus the fact that the economic hits that we get from these hurricanes and these droughts and these tornadoes, all these things we've seen suddenly start to pop up in ways they never did before. I mean, 500-year flood every 5 months now. I mean, it's ridiculous. And that's part of what's happening with the way we're changing the climate. And the former secretaries Baker and Schultz have put out a comprehensive plan on how to deal with this. It has to do with a carbon tax that would go back. The public would get the money from it, but with a punishment for those countries that don't reduce their emissions. And so there are a lot of creative ways to do this in ways that aren't going to crater the economy, which everybody is so focused on. It doesn't have to be that way. In fact, it can be something that really spurs economic growth. And we kind of are at a perfect time to do that because there's been such a dislocation to the economy.
So you've spent a lot of time, obviously, on environmental issues, but you've also spent a lot of time on energy-related issues. How do you view the future of energy and connectivity to the environment and what we should be spending our resources on in terms of expanding renewables or new jobs and so on? I mean, how do you tie the environmental issues and the energy issues together?
Well, I mean, that's a big issue. The energy issue is critical. And I am a big believer in nuclear, for instance. I don't think we should be shutting down any more nuclear reactors. It's a bridge between the old way of providing energy and the green renewables. Because right now they're not 24/7 base power. When they get to that point, fine.
Sorry,
we can just overcome it. I mean,
Sure.
do away with it. But the small modular reactors, we need to have more federal research and development on those small SMRs, as they're called, the small modular reactors. It's one of those things where we're seeing a growth in solar panels. The cost is coming down, wind power. This is a time when we can really start to expand that. I mean, certainly oil and gas have taken a huge hit, not just because of the pandemic, although that has driven a lot of it because people are traveling yet less, there's less demand for it, but this whole Saudi, Russia, US and Mexico issue has also driven it down. And I'm not sure it's going to come back in the way that, certainly not the way it was.
Yeah.
So that there's an opportunity here to really promote some of the new ways of providing green power. And that's what we should be going for.
So one of the trends I'm seeing through these various coffee talks that we're doing is there seems to be an acceleration happening on so many issues, right? So whether it was, we had a conversation about the film industry, right? And the prediction was in 5 years, Netflix and Amazon will just overcome, and that's just kind of, that's just like today. Now it's happening versus 5 years from now. Conversations on the environment. If there's a silver lining that you see through all this of maybe accelerating our focus on certain issues, what do you think those issues are that, will hopefully get more attention today than maybe they would have? Maybe it would have taken, 5 or 10 years to get the attention they deserve.
Well, certainly scientific research, I hope, because unfortunately the trend in this administration has been to kind of denigrate scientists and dismiss science, kind of send the message it's not really important. I think people are waking up and saying, absolutely not. This is critical and key. And we need to encourage young people to get involved in science and the STEM education. Hopefully that will take off even more as people understand the critical need for science, good quality science. And that's one where there's been I think a hole over the last 3 years that will hopefully be filled. Again, I have to get back to, I think most people will just focus, and certainly that's going to be the message out of Washington, it's just going to be all about the economy. It's going to be about how do we get the economy back? And that's critically important. The thing to remember though, is you can throw a lot of money at it to try to get it started, but you need to do it smart.
Yeah.
We need to be smart about it. Where do we make our investments? How do we make our investments? Who's overseeing to make sure that those investments are having the impact that we want from them? And how are we learning? What do we learn from our failures? As there are going to be failures, there have been failures, and there will continue to be. But also, what do we learn from our successes? And this is something that is going to give us an opportunity to really start to explore a little bit more and look beyond. I mean, we have to deal with what we've got right now, but it's not the time to stop looking beyond what's going to happen next. As you're pointing out, it's not time to stop thinking about what does the new economy look like? Are we going to be commuting as much, or are we going to be working more from home? What does that mean for mass transit? What does that mean for those jobs? How do we retrain people? Where should we be focusing? Those are big questions, and they take a lot of attention and time and thought, and there should be people looking at that right now. You have one group of the scientists and the doctors, let them deal with this crisis of the COVID. Get out of the way, don't politicize it. This isn't politics, this is medicinal. I mean, this is science. This is a pandemic. And Mother Nature could care less about political parties and geopolitical boundaries. So get out of the way of that. Let the scientists, let the doctors deal with that one. Other people start focusing on how do we get this economy back when we can really fully reopen. If we ever fully fully reopen the way we used to.
So one last thing, just to toss out there before I let you go. You've obviously been connected to politics and public service, your family, for decades. How do you think about just civic engagement, right? I mean, it seems like such a toxic environment, and so many of the problems we're talking about today require, I would think, new energy, new leadership, new people, but it doesn't seem like a very welcoming environment based on, the partisan politics and social media and just this tension and hostility. I mean, how does that bode for the future and for some of these efforts that priorities that we need to focus on? I mean, how do you think about just the state of civic engagement in the United States?
Well, let's start with civics. We got to start teaching it in our schools again. Let's start with that, so people remember that while we will fight really hard over our rights in a democracy and republic, what we have certain responsibilities too, because we got here because we weren't voting. I mean, if the average voter turnout in a primary is 10%, what does that tell you? It tells you the most partisan people are making the choices for you in the fall, and they tend to be on the extremes. And therefore, you get to the fall and you don't like what you see there, and you say, I don't pox on both your houses, I'm not going to get involved. And that's telling those in power we either like what you're doing or we don't care. And that's been wrong. And so now all of a sudden we wake up and say, how did we get here? This is dysfunctional. But let's remember that back right in the lead up to the Civil War, I don't think we've ever been any more divided than we were then. And we are probably pretty close to that divided now, but it's a much smaller group that is the hard on the right and the hard on the left. Still, the majority of Americans are in the middle, and we have just got to find our voice and understand that this election coming up is going to be important to send a message in a whole lot of different ways on the local level, on the federal level. We have got to be heard, and we've got to say in the run-up to the election, what's important to us? Ask the questions. What do you care about? And ask those who want to represent you where they are on these issues, and be willing and ready to vote, and vote for the people that you think will bring the change that we need and want. But don't stay home. I mean, the worst thing that could happen is if you're not 100% happy with your choices, and I don't think anybody's going to be 100% happy, don't let that stop you voting, because one is better than the other. You are going to find that you're going to like one better than the other, understanding that neither one is going to be perfect, and it looks like we're only going to have two choices. So go out there and still fulfill that obligation that you have in the democracy.
Excellent. Well, it is so great to see you. We appreciate you taking the time to be here with us, and glad you're healthy and well, and spending some time part-time teaching, I hear, right? So
well, that was my daughter's way to get rid of occupy her kids' time. So it's taking much more time than I thought, and I suspect that once we get back to a little bit more normal, that teachers have a really good opportunity to get pay raises, because there are a lot of parents saying, help.
I'm barely qualified. Yeah, I'm barely qualified to do recess, which I handle every day. So I'm in total agreement with you. Well, look, Governor Christine Todd Whitman, thank you for being here with us on Coffee with Ken today. We're going to take a break for Memorial Day. Our next conversation is going to be Friday, June 5th with Jonathan Greenblatt, the president of the Anti-Defamation League. Thank you so much for tuning in. Governor, always great to see you. And stay safe and healthy. Talk soon.
You too.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye.